The television courtroom had never witnessed anything quite like what was about to unfold. When Diane Patterson walked through those doors with her designer handbag and a thick binder labeled evidence, she had no idea she was about to become the most hated woman on the internet. What started as her carefully planned performance to extract $5,000 from an innocent neighbor would end with a single word from Judge Judy that would destroy her reputation forever. We're talking about 47 million views across every platform, trending #1 worldwide, and a moment so satisfying that people would watch it on repeat just to feel that rush of justice being served. But here's what makes this story absolutely insane. Diane Patterson didn't just interrupt Judge Judy once or twice. She interrupted America's toughest judge 6 times in a row, each interruption more arrogant than the last. And then Judge Judy spoke her 7th word. That final word landed with the force of a nuclear bomb, completely obliterating Diane's lies and exposing her as the fraud she'd been for years. If you're ready to see the most satisfying moment of instant karma ever captured on camera, smash that subscribe button right now because what you're about to witness will restore your faith that justice still exists. Hit that notification bell because we're bringing you the most explosive courtroom moments where entitled people learn that respect isn't optional. Meet Diane Patterson, 48 years old, the textbook definition of a professional Karen who had turned complaining into a full-time career. This wasn't some random woman having a bad day. Diane had spent 2 decades perfecting the art of weaponizing the legal system against anyone who dared inconvenience her. The former PDA president asked to resign after trying to ban Halloween. The neighborhood watch captain was removed after filing noise complaints against every household on her street. HOA board members voted out after attempting to fine people for having the wrong shade of white on their window trim. But those positions were just training for her true calling. Diane had discovered how to turn personal disputes into profitable lawsuits, and she had gotten very good at it. Over 5 years, Diane had filed 23 separate lawsuits in small claims courts. 23 times she had played the victim, shed practiced tears, and walked away with settlement money. She sued a hair salon for $1,500 claiming they ruined her hair, when they'd simply refused to honor an expired coupon. She sued a dry cleaner for $2,000 claiming they destroyed her dress, when they just closed 15 minutes early one day. She sued her employer for $3,500 claiming discrimination, when she'd actually been disciplined for chronic tardiness. She even sued her church group for $1,200 claiming emotional distress after they didn't select her for a leadership position. The pattern was crystal clear. Diane would manufacture legal claims designed to extract maximum money while requiring minimum proof, and she had collected over $47,000 doing it. What made Diane dangerous was her complete lack of empathy combined with encyclopedic knowledge of how to game the system. She knew most people would rather pay a few $1,000s than spend $5,000 on an attorney. She could cry on cue, present herself as vulnerable, and make lies sound plausible enough that busy judges wouldn't dig deeper. But Diane had made one critical error. She had started believing her own performance. She thought she was smarter than everyone, that judges were easy to manipulate, that her acting skills could fool anyone. She had no idea she was about to meet Judge Judy Sheindlin, who had crushed manipulators for 25 years and had seen every trick 1,000 times before. The case seemed simple on the surface. Diane was suing her neighbor, Tom Harrison, for $5,000, claiming his dog viciously attacked her. But the dog was Mr. Fluffkins, a 12-pound, 14-year-old Pomeranian with severe arthritis who could barely climb 3 steps. The real story had nothing to do with any attack. Tom Harrison was a 72-year-old widowed veteran whose late wife had bought Mr. Fluffkins 6 years earlier, 2 months before her cancer diagnosis. That dog had been by her side through every chemotherapy session, every hospital stay. When she died 3 years ago, Mr. Fluffkins became Tom's last connection to his wife of 48 years. The actual conflict started when Tom's oak tree blocked Diane's sunset view. She demanded he cut it down. Tom politely refused, offering only to trim branches on her property line. Diane decided he needed punishment, so she fabricated a dog attack story. She took photos of scratches she made with her own fingernails. Filed a police report 3 days later with no witnesses. Created fake therapy records. She wanted the dog taken away and Tom bankrupted for refusing her demands. But Tom Harrison fought back. Using savings meant for a new roof, he hired a lawyer. He gathered Ring camera footage showing Mr. Fluffkins barely walking on arthritic legs. Veterinary statements about the dog's medical conditions making attacks physically impossible. Character witnesses from neighbors. Medical expert analysis proving Diane's scratches were self-inflicted. When Judge Judy's producers found this case, they discovered Diane's pattern of serial litigation. 23 lawsuits in 5 years. They brought it to Judge Judy, who personally reviewed the materials before the hearing, something she rarely did. She knew exactly what Diane Patterson was, and she was ready. For Tom, this case was about protecting his late wife's final gift. For Diane, it was supposed to be her 24th easy victory. Instead, she was about to experience the most humiliating public destruction of her life, captured on camera for millions to witness. Before we show you how Judge Judy demolished this professional Karen with one devastating word, hit that like button if you're ready to see real justice served, and keep watching because what's coming will be the most satisfying thing you see all week. The moment Diane Patterson walked into Judge Judy's courtroom, every person in that room could feel the entitled energy radiating off her like heat from asphalt on a summer day. She strutted through those doors like she owned the building, her designer heels clicking against the floor with the rhythm of someone who had done this dance 23 times before and won every single round. She was carrying that massive binder labeled evidence, clutched against her chest like a shield, and her face wore the kind of smug confidence that comes from years of manipulating sympathetic judges and intimidating innocent people into settlements. Diane had spent the morning perfecting her appearance in the mirror, choosing an outfit that screamed respectable victim, practicing her expressions of pain and trauma, rehearsing the exact moment when she would let her voice crack for maximum emotional impact. She had absolutely no idea that she was walking into a courtroom run by a woman who had been destroying people exactly like her since before Diane was born. Across from her, Tom Harrison sat quietly in the plaintiff's area, looking exactly like what he was, a 72-year-old widowed veteran who just wanted to protect his late wife's dog and live in peace. His hands were folded in his lap, and tucked into his folder was a photo of Mr. Fluffkins that anyone with eyes could see showed a harmless elderly Pomeranian. The contrast between these two people couldn't have been more stark, and the audience members who had been watching Judge Judy for decades could already sense that something special was brewing. Judge Judy began with her standard opening, her voice carrying that signature tone of authority that had made grown attorneys nervous for 25 years. "Miss Patterson, you're suing Mr. Harrison for $5,000 claiming his dog attacked you. Tell me what happened." It was a simple question, straightforward and clear, the kind of opening that would allow an honest person to simply state the facts of their case. But Diane Patterson was not an honest person, and she had never in her life simply stated facts when she could instead deliver a theatrical performance. She didn't just answer the question. She launched into what can only be described as a one-woman show that would have made community theater directors cringe. "Your Honor, this man's vicious animal completely destroyed my sense of safety in my own neighborhood," she began, her voice dripping with practiced victimhood. But then she made her first critical mistake. Instead of sticking to what allegedly happened, Diane started editorializing, adding dramatic commentary about Tom's character, rolling her eyes when she mentioned his attempts to downplay the incident, making exaggerated hand gestures that looked like she was performing Shakespeare in the park. As anyone with common sense would know, she said with condescending emphasis, "A dangerous dog is a liability to the entire community, and obviously Mr. Harrison has no respect for his neighbor's safety." Judge Judy's eyebrows raised slightly, just a fraction of an inch, but veteran court watchers in the audience recognized it immediately as the first warning sign that trouble was brewing. "Miss Patterson," Judge Judy interrupted, her tone still professional but with an edge sharp enough to cut glass, "I didn't ask for your analysis of Mr. Harrison's character. I asked what happened to you." The courtroom went silent in that particular way that happens right before lightning strikes, that moment of held breath when everyone senses something significant is about to occur. But Diane Patterson, blinded by her own arrogance and years of successful manipulation, completely missed the warning. Instead of backing down, instead of recognizing that she was being corrected by a judge who demanded respect, Diane actually let out an exaggerated sigh. The kind of sigh you reserve for incompetent store clerks or customer service representatives who aren't giving you what you want fast enough. "Well, if you'll let me finish my story, Your Honor," she said with barely concealed irritation, "I was trying to explain the context of why this attack was so traumatic." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Diane Patterson had just sighed at Judge Judy Scheindlin in dismissive frustration, as if the judge was the problem, as if this woman who had presided over 20,000 cases was somehow interfering with Diane's perfectly planned performance. The audience members exchanged shocked glances. Even the camera operator seemed to tense up. In 25 years of running her courtroom, Judge Judy had dealt with thousands of difficult litigants, but the sheer audacity of someone actually sighing at her in dismissive frustration was something that rarely happened, and when it did, it never ended well for the person foolish enough to do it. Judge Judy leaned forward in her chair, her famous steely gaze locking onto Diane like a heat-seeking missile finding its target. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dropping to that dangerously quiet tone that made seasoned attorneys break out in cold sweats, "did you just sigh at me in my courtroom?" The question hung in the air like a sword ready to fall, and this was the moment when any reasonable person would have recognized the danger they were in, would have apologized immediately, would have adjusted their attitude and approach. But Diane Patterson was not a reasonable person. She was a woman who had spent 5 years believing her own performance, convinced that her manipulation skills were foolproof, certain that she could charm or intimidate her way through any situation. And incredibly, impossibly, stupidly, Diane seemed to think this was still going according to her plan. She actually smirked, not just a little smile but a full-blown condescending smirk that screamed, "I can't believe I have to deal with this incompetent person." She even turned slightly toward the audience as if she was about to share an inside joke with them about how unreasonable this judge was being, as if the people watching were going to be on her side against Judge Judy. What Diane didn't understand, what her arrogance and entitlement had completely blinded her to, was that she had just lit the fuse on a legal bomb that was about to explode directly in her face, and Judge Judy was simply waiting for the perfect moment to detonate it. Judge Judy's response to Diane's smirk was swift and surgical, delivered with the precision of a master craftsman who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Miss Patterson, let me save us all some time here," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a scalpel through tissue. "Based on the evidence you've presented, which is virtually nothing, and your attitude in my courtroom, which is absolutely unacceptable, I need to ask you one very simple question before we go any further." The entire courtroom leaned forward collectively, sensing that something monumental was building. Diane sat up slightly straighter in her chair, clearly believing that she was about to have an opportunity to deliver more of her practiced victim performance, still somehow convinced that her manipulation tactics were working. Tom Harrison sat frozen, hardly daring to breathe, watching this woman who had tormented him for months finally face someone who wasn't afraid of her threats or intimidated by her aggressive legal tactics. Judge Judy opened the folder in front of her with deliberate slowness, making sure every camera angle captured the moment, and then she looked directly into Diane Patterson's eyes with the kind of stare that had made criminals confess and liars break down for decades. "Miss Patterson, I'm going to ask you a yes or no question, and I want a one-word answer. Do you understand me? One word. Yes or no?" Diane nodded, that smirk still playing at the corners of her mouth, clearly thinking she could navigate whatever trap she imagined was being set. Judge Judy's voice became even quieter, even more controlled, the kind of calm that comes right before a Category 5 hurricane makes landfall. "Did your neighbor's dog actually attack you? Yes or no?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade suspended over Diane's neck. It was the simplest possible question, binary and clear, requiring only a single-word response. But for Diane Patterson, a woman who had built her entire fraudulent empire on elaborate stories and emotional manipulation, the idea of answering with just yes or no was apparently impossible. Her face went through a series of visible calculations, her eyes darting around the room as her brain tried to figure out the best angle to play. She knew she was trapped because a simple yes would be an obvious lie that Judge Judy clearly had evidence to contradict, but saying no would mean admitting her entire case was fabricated. So Diane did what manipulators always do when cornered. She tried to blur the lines, to create confusion, to avoid direct accountability. Her mouth opened and the words started to come out. "Well, that depends on your definition of attack, Your Honor, because what I experienced was," she never got to finish that sentence because Judge Judy leaned forward and spoke one single word that would destroy Diane Patterson's life forever. "Liar." The word wasn't yelled or screamed. It wasn't delivered with emotion or anger. Judge Judy stated it as a simple, undeniable fact, the same way you might observe that the sky is blue or water is wet. Just one word, spoken with absolute certainty and devastating clarity. "Liar." The courtroom erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs. Diane's face transformed in real time, cycling through shock, then flushing red with anger, then draining to a pale white as the reality of what was happening crashed down on her. That single word hung in the air like a death sentence, and Judge Judy wasn't even close to finished. "You fabricated this entire story because your neighbor wouldn't cut down his tree to improve your view," Judge Judy continued, her voice remaining calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. You took photographs of scratches that you inflicted on yourself with your own fingernails. You weaponized my courtroom and the legal system for personal revenge against a 72-year-old widowed veteran whose only crime was refusing to destroy a 50-year-old tree to satisfy your entitled demands. And you wasted everyone's time with this theatrical performance that might have worked on other judges, but it doesn't work here. Each sentence landed on Diane like a physical blow, and the cameras captured every second of her facade crumbling in real time. She tried to interrupt, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, but no words would come out. Her carefully constructed victim narrative was being demolished brick by brick in front of millions of viewers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Judge Judy held up a still frame from Tom's Ring camera footage, the image showing Mr. Fluffkins barely standing on arthritic legs, clearly struggling just to walk down 3 small steps. This is your vicious beast, Miss Patterson. This 14-year-old Pomeranian with severe arthritis who can barely climb stairs. This is the animal you claim attacked you so violently that you needed therapy and $5,000 in damages. The sarcasm in Judge Judy's voice was withering, stripping away every last shred of Diane's credibility. But Judge Judy still wasn't done, because she had done something she rarely did. She had personally researched Diane Patterson's background, and what she had found was about to be exposed to the world. Let's talk about your history, Miss Patterson, because I think it's very relevant to your credibility in this courtroom, Judge Judy said, pulling out another document. 23 lawsuits filed in the past 5 years. 23 separate occasions where you've stood before a judge claiming to be a victim of someone else's negligence or malice. Hair salon, dry cleaner, former employer, church group, neighbors, small business owners. Every single lawsuit filed after you had a personal dispute with the defendant. Every single case is designed to extract a few $1,000s from people who couldn't afford to fight you properly. The audience was completely silent now, stunned by the pattern being revealed. You've collected over $47,000 in settlements and judgments, Miss Patterson. You've turned litigation into a weapon and victimhood into a profession. You're not a victim. You're a predator who exploits the legal system to punish anyone who doesn't give you exactly what you want. Diane was visibly shaking now, all her arrogance and confidence completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning horror of someone realizing their entire con had been exposed on national television. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair and delivered her ruling with finality. Case dismissed. You get nothing, Miss Patterson. Furthermore, I'm awarding Mr. Harrison $5,000 for malicious prosecution. You came into my courtroom with lies, you wasted everyone's time, and now you're going to pay for it. I'm also recommending this case to the district attorney for potential perjury charges, and I'm forwarding your litigation history to the state bar for investigation into abuse of the legal system. The gavel came down with the sound of absolute justice, and Diane Patterson's reign of terror was over. The moment Judge Judy's gavel hit the bench with that final, decisive crack, the energy in the courtroom shifted so dramatically that you could almost feel the air pressure change. Diane Patterson stood frozen at the defendant's table, her hands gripping the edge so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, unable to process that her 24th attempt at litigation fraud had just blown up in her face in the most spectacular and public way imaginable. Tom Harrison sat quietly in his chair, tears streaming down his weathered face, not tears of victory or celebration but tears of pure relief that his late wife's dog was finally safe from this woman's lies. The audience members, who had been holding their collective breath during Judge Judy's devastating takedown, began to applaud spontaneously, something that rarely happened in Judge Judy's courtroom because she typically demanded absolute silence and order. But for exactly 5 seconds, Judge Judy allowed the applause to continue, a tacit acknowledgement that justice had been served in a way that resonated beyond just this single case. Then her hand went up and silence returned immediately, because even in moments of victory, her courtroom operated by her rules and her rules alone. Diane tried to gather her evidence binder with trembling hands, but her coordination had completely abandoned her in the shock of her public destruction. Papers spilled everywhere, scattering across the floor in a visual metaphor for her entire case falling apart. Her carefully staged photographs of fake scratches, her printed internet articles about dog attacks, her manufactured therapy records, all of it spread across the courtroom floor like the garbage it had always been. Tom quietly stood and approached Judge Judy's bench, his voice breaking with emotion as he thanked her for seeing through Diane's lies and protecting Mr. Fluffkins. He pulled out a photograph from his folder, a picture of his late wife holding the Pomeranian puppy on the day they brought him home, both of them smiling with the kind of pure joy that comes from simple moments of love. Judge Judy's expression softened for just a moment as she looked at the photo, a rare glimpse of the human compassion behind her tough exterior, and she told Tom that his wife would be proud of him for fighting back against a bully. Diane attempted to approach Tom, possibly to threaten him one final time or to continue her manipulation even in defeat, but the bailiff stepped between them immediately with a firm hand raised. "Miss Patterson, gather your belongings and leave this courtroom now," he said with the kind of authority that left no room for argument. Diane's exit was captured from multiple camera angles, and it was the complete opposite of her confident entrance just 30 minutes earlier. She walked out with her head down, mascara running down her face in dark streaks, papers clutched haphazardly to her chest, looking like someone who had just watched their entire world collapse. Within 2 hours of the episode airing, the internet absolutely exploded with clips, reactions, and commentary about what would instantly become known as the liar moment. The 7-second clip of Judge Judy leaning forward and stating that single devastating word began spreading across every social media platform like wildfire. On Twitter, the hashtag Karen vs. Judge Judy was trending #1 worldwide within 90 minutes, with over 3 million tweets sharing the clip and celebrating the instant karma. On TikTok, the moment spawned countless reaction videos, with creators filming themselves watching Diane's destruction for the first time, their faces going through shock, satisfaction, and pure joy as Judge Judy demolished the fraudulent claims. The original clip accumulated over 30 million views across all the reaction videos combined in just the first 24 hours. Reddit communities like Justice Served and FU Karen had the courtroom video pinned to the top of their pages, with comment threads thousands deep analyzing every moment of Diane's performance and Judge Judy's systematic destruction of her lies. YouTube commentary channels created deep dive videos breaking down the case, examining Diane's body language, discussing the psychology of serial litigators, and praising Judge Judy's investigative work in uncovering the pattern of fraudulent lawsuits. The video reached 47 million total views across all platforms within the first week, making it the most viral courtroom moment in television history. But the viral spread wasn't just people enjoying the drama. Something deeper was resonating with viewers around the world. Legal commentators began discussing the epidemic of frivolous lawsuits in America, using Diane's case as the perfect example of how the system gets abused. News networks picked up the story, interviewing small claims court judges who confirmed that people like Diane Patterson were a real problem, clogging up court systems with manufactured claims while legitimate cases got delayed. Public records journalists started digging into Diane's 23 previous lawsuits, and they began contacting her victims to tell their stories. One by one, small business owners and individuals came forward with their experiences of being targeted by Diane. A hair salon owner explained how Diane's lawsuit had nearly bankrupted her family business even though they settled just to avoid higher legal fees. An elderly man described how Diane sued him over a property dispute and he paid her $2,000 because he couldn't handle the stress of fighting her at his age. A single mother talked about how Diane's fraudulent claim against her had drained her savings and caused her to lose sleep for months worrying about losing everything. The pattern became undeniable, and public sympathy for Diane evaporated completely as people realized she had been terrorizing innocent people for years. The response from the online community went beyond just sharing videos. Someone created a GoFundMe for Tom Harrison without his knowledge or permission, simply titled, "Help the Veteran Who Stood Up to Karen." The fundraiser explained Tom's situation, how he had used his roof repair savings to hire a lawyer to protect his late wife's dog, how he was living on a fixed income, and how he represented everyone who had ever been bullied by someone like Diane Patterson. The response was overwhelming. Within 48 hours, the GoFundMe had raised over $45,000 from people around the world who wanted to support someone who had finally fought back against a serial litigator and won. Contributors left comments sharing their own experiences with frivolous lawsuits, expressing gratitude that Tom had the courage to fight instead of settling, and celebrating that justice had finally been served. Tom was initially uncomfortable with the attention and the money, but his neighbors and the GoFundMe organizers convinced him to accept it, explaining that he had become a symbol of standing up to bullies and that people genuinely wanted to help him after everything he'd been through. 3 months after the episode aired, Judge Judy sat down for an interview with a legal podcast to discuss the case that had become a cultural phenomenon, and what she revealed about her approach to the Diane Patterson case gave millions of viewers an even deeper appreciation for the methodical takedown they had witnessed. Judge Judy explained that the moment she reviewed Diane's file during her pre-trial preparation, she knew exactly what kind of person she was dealing with because the pattern was so clear and so familiar from her decades on the bench. "People like Diane Patterson are why I do what I do," Judge Judy said with characteristic bluntness. They exploit the compassion built into our legal system, they weaponize victimhood against innocent people, and they count on everyone being too tired, too scared, or too broke to fight back properly. But when they walk into my courtroom, that game ends immediately. She revealed that calling Diane a liar so directly and plainly wasn't an emotional reaction but a calculated decision based on 30 years of experience dealing with manipulators. The worst thing you can do with someone like her is dance around the truth or soften your language to be polite, Judge Judy explained. They interpret politeness as weakness and any hesitation as an opportunity to continue manipulating. Sometimes people need to hear the truth stated plainly and clearly, without sugar-coating, without room for interpretation. She was lying. That's a fact. So I called her a liar. Simple as that. Judge Judy also discussed the 6 interruptions that led to that 7th word, explaining that each interruption was actually Diane Patterson digging her own grave deeper while believing she was asserting dominance. I gave her 6 opportunities to show respect, to stop performing, to simply answer questions honestly, Judge Judy said. Each time she interrupted me, she was telling me and everyone watching that she believed the rules didn't apply to her, that she was smarter than everyone else, that she could manipulate her way through my courtroom just like she'd done in 23 previous cases. I let her continue because I wanted her to expose herself completely, to remove any doubt about what kind of person she was. By the time I asked her that final yes or no question, she had already destroyed any credibility she might have had, and everyone watching knew she was about to lie again. That's when I stopped the performance permanently. The interviewer asked Judge Judy if she had any concerns about calling someone a liar so directly on national television, and her response was pure Judge Judy. I have 0 concerns about telling the truth. Diane Patterson is a liar. That's not an opinion, that's a fact supported by evidence. She lied about a dog attack, she lied in her court filings, she lied to my face when I asked her a direct question. If people don't want to be called liars on television, here's a simple solution: don't lie in my courtroom. The impact of the case extended far beyond viral videos and internet fame, creating real legislative change in multiple states across the country. Within 6 months of the episode airing, 3 states had introduced bills nicknamed Diane's Law that specifically targeted frivolous litigation and serial lawsuit filers. The proposed legislation included mandatory sanctions for plaintiffs whose claims were proven to be fabricated, a 3-strikes rule where people who filed multiple fraudulent cases would face increasing penalties and restrictions, required bond posting for anyone with a history of questionable lawsuits, and automatic attorney fee awards for defendants who successfully proved malicious prosecution. Legal reform advocates used the Judge Judy case as their primary example when testifying before state legislatures, showing the viral video to lawmakers and explaining that Diane Patterson represented a real problem that was clogging court systems and destroying innocent people's lives. Small claims court judges across the country reported that they started using the case as a teaching tool in their courtrooms, sometimes showing the video to litigants whose claims seemed suspicious and explaining that fraudulent cases would be investigated and punished. The phrase, "This isn't Judge Judy's courtroom," became judicial shorthand for warning litigants that lies would be exposed and accountability would be enforced regardless of how sympathetic someone tried to appear. Legal aid organizations began using the Tom Harrison case as an example in their training programs, teaching people how to recognize malicious prosecution and encouraging victims of frivolous lawsuits to fight back rather than automatically settling. They created resource guides specifically addressing serial litigators, explaining the warning signs that someone was weaponizing the court system, documenting patterns of behavior, and providing templates for counterclaims and malicious prosecution cases. The impact was measurable. Statistics from multiple states showed a documented decline in nuisance lawsuits in the year following the episode, with court administrators reporting that some serial filers had simply stopped filing cases altogether. Insurance companies changed their settlement policies based on the attention the case brought to fraudulent claims, becoming more willing to fight dubious cases rather than automatically settling to avoid legal fees. Defense attorneys reported that they were winning more cases against questionable plaintiffs because juries had seen the Judge Judy video and were more skeptical of victim narratives that seemed performative or inconsistent. The case had fundamentally shifted the cultural conversation around frivolous litigation, and Diane Patterson had accidentally become the poster child for everything wrong with lawsuit abuse. Beyond the legal system, the case achieved something even more significant. It became a cultural touchstone representing accountability in an era where many people felt that entitled behavior went unpunished and consequences were optional for those willing to play victim loudly enough. The single word, liar, became shorthand in internet culture for calling out dishonesty plainly and directly without apology. Memes featuring Judge Judy's face and that one word spread across every platform, used whenever someone was caught in an obvious lie or exposed for manipulative behavior. The moment represented something people desperately wanted to see more of in their daily lives: authority figures willing to speak truth directly, consequences enforced fairly and immediately, and bullies finally facing the accountability they had avoided for so long. Psychologists and social commentators analyzed why the video resonated so powerfully with so many people, concluding that viewers were surrounded by dishonesty and manipulation in their daily lives, frustrated by watching bad behavior rewarded, and craving examples of justice being served clearly and definitively. The Judge Judy takedown of Diane Patterson provided vicarious satisfaction for everyone who had ever been lied to, manipulated, or bullied by someone who seemed untouchable. Tom Harrison's life changed dramatically in the months following his victory. The $45,000 from the GoFundMe allowed him to pay off the remaining medical bills from his wife's cancer treatment that he had been slowly chipping away at for 3 years, afford premium veterinary care for Mr. Fluffkins including treatment for his arthritis that significantly improved his quality of life, make necessary repairs to his home that he had been postponing, and even set aside some savings for the first time in years. But more important than the money was the restoration of his peace and dignity. His neighbors, who had watched Diane terrorize him for months, threw a celebration in his honor where dozens of people showed up with their dogs to meet the famous Mr. Fluffkins. The elderly Pomeranian, suddenly internet famous, was surrounded by admirers taking photos and giving him treats, and Tom said it was the first time since his wife's death that he felt genuine joy and community support. Local news did a follow-up story on Tom, interviewing him in his home with Mr. Fluffkins on his lap, and he showed them the photo of his late wife that he had brought to court. "My wife always told me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have been proud that I protected her dog and didn't let a bully win." He framed the official court ruling from Judge Judy and hung it in his living room, not as a trophy but as a reminder that truth and persistence matter even when the fight seems impossible. As for Diane Patterson, her life took a very different trajectory after her public humiliation. Within days of the episode airing, her identity was discovered by internet users who recognized her from the neighborhood, and her personal information spread rapidly across social media. Her employer, a customer service call center where she ironically handled complaints, terminated her employment after the video went viral, citing that her behavior brought negative attention to the company and demonstrated character issues incompatible with their values. Her social media accounts were flooded with thousands of comments from people sharing the video and calling out her years of fraudulent behavior. She made everything private and eventually deleted most of her accounts entirely, but screenshots of her previous posts had already been archived and shared widely. Most devastating for Diane was that her previous lawsuit victims started coming forward publicly, and several of them consulted attorneys about possibly pursuing action to recover the settlements they had paid based on her fraudulent claims. The district attorney's office opened an investigation into potential perjury charges related to her false statements in the dog attack case, and while criminal charges were ultimately not filed, the investigation itself and the public attention it brought added to Diane's humiliation. Public records showed that she moved to a different state approximately 6 months after the episode aired, and she legally changed her name, presumably trying to escape the infamy that followed her everywhere. In the 5 years since the case, Diane Patterson, now living under a different name in a different state, has not filed a single lawsuit according to public record searches. Whether this represents genuine reform or simply more careful behavior is unknown, but her reign of terror through fraudulent litigation ended the day Judge Judy called her a liar on national television. Judge Judy herself continued her legendary career, and she occasionally referenced the Diane Patterson case in interviews as one of the most satisfying moments of holding someone accountable for abusing the legal system. She received hundreds of letters from Diane's previous victims thanking her for exposing someone who had caused them so much pain and financial hardship, and she kept several of those letters in her office as reminders of why her direct, no-nonsense approach mattered. The case reinforced everything Judge Judy had been preaching for decades: that respect for the court system is non-negotiable, that liars will be exposed regardless of how convincing their performance might be, that accountability isn't cruelty but necessary justice, and that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is tell someone the unvarnished truth about their behavior. 5 years later, the video still circulates regularly on social media, introduced to new audiences who watch in amazement as one word from Judge Judy destroys years of fraudulent behavior and exposes a professional victim as the predator she always was. The legacy of the 7-word takedown extends beyond any single case or viral video. It represents a cultural moment when millions of people simultaneously experienced the satisfaction of watching accountability enforced, consequences delivered, and a bully finally stopped by someone with the authority and courage to speak truth plainly. In a world where many people feel that dishonesty is rewarded and manipulation goes unpunished, the image of Judge Judy leaning forward and stating one simple word liar became a symbol of what justice should look like. Direct, clear, unambiguous, and final. The case taught viewers that standing up to bullies like Diane Patterson is possible, that truth eventually wins even against practiced liars, that the legal system can work when judges prioritize facts over performances, and that sometimes the right word delivered at exactly the right moment can change everything. Tom Harrison proved that fighting back matters even when you're scared and outmatched. Judge Judy demonstrated that authority figures should speak truth without apology. And Diane Patterson, despite her intentions, became the cautionary tale that showed an entire generation exactly what happens when you build your life on lies and finally meet someone who refuses to play along with your performance. If this story of justice, accountability, and one devastating word restored your faith that consequences still exist for people who abuse the system, smash that subscribe button right now so you never miss another moment of entitled people learning the hard way that respect isn't optional and truth always wins eventually. Hit that like button if you believe Judge Judy is a legend who says what everyone else is thinking but afraid to say out loud. Drop a comment telling me about a time you stood up to a bully or watched someone face consequences they thought they'd never face, because these stories matter and this community is built on people who believe accountability is essential. Share this video with anyone who needs to see that karma is real and sometimes it has a gavel and a law degree. Turn on those notifications because we're bringing you more incredible courtroom moments where justice gets served and entitled attitudes get destroyed. And remember, in Judge Judy's world and in life, you can interrupt once, you can interrupt twice, but by the seventh word, the truth is coming out whether you're ready for it or not. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where another Karen learns that disrespecting the wrong person has consequences she never saw coming.